In the early 1200s, Saint Dominic, who had gone out to pray in a forest, received a heavenly vision by the Blessed Virgin Mary. She instructed him to spread a new devotion called the Rosary. Ever since then, Catholics throughout the centuries have prayed the Rosary to answer their prayers and to meditate on the life of Christ. Thousands, potentially millions of miracles have been attributed to praying the Rosary, ranging from healing of diseases to keeping sons safe in wars. In this video, we're going to zoom in and look at just 4 of those miracles that have occurred through the Holy Rosary. During World War II, an atomic bomb was dropped on the town of Hiroshima, Japan. Everything within a mile was annihilated. However, upon further investigation, people noticed that there was one group of survivors within that 1 mile radius of devastation. That group had 8 people in total. They were 8 Jesuit priests. These 8 men, like the 8 that survived the Great Flood, walked away from the atomic blast and lived into old age without radiation poisoning. Interestingly enough, at most, they had relatively minor injuries, no loss of hearing, or any other visible long-term defects or maladies. Naturally, the world was curious. They were interviewed and examined numerous times by scientists and healthcare workers about their remarkable experience, wondering how did they survive and how did they come off so unscathed? The Jesuits said, "We believe that we survived because we were living the message of Fatima. We lived and prayed the Rosary daily in that home." In the midst of a Philippine revolution, chaos was felt on the horizon. Standing in pairs, Sister Okariza and 16 other nuns led the group as soldiers escorted military tanks with their turrets focused on the sisters. The sisters were unarmed apart from one thing: the Rosary. The nuns said that staring down those tanks has been the scariest experience of her life. In quote, "I said, Lord, forgive me for all of my sins and even the offenses of our Filipino people. If rarely the tanks would crush us, at least the 2 of us kill our sisters, not the people, because we did not want bloodshed from this revolution." But instead of shooting or driving over the group, the tanks stopped and the soldiers didn't harm the protesters. Instead, they joined them in reciting the Rosary. Sister Okariza said that God delivered them from the hands of a dictator and saved the country from what would have ultimately provoked a violent reaction. She said she looks back to that time as a source of courage and a reminder to stand for what is right always. The miracle of the Rosary. As the Chicago Tribune reported, instead of guns, there were prayers. Instead of bloodshed, celebrations. Instead of casualties, converts. Guns fell to rosaries in the Philippine Revolution.
In 1978, there was a serial killer named Ted Bundy who went on a rampage in Florida at the University in Tallahassee. And he massacred 2 girls in a sorority house, and he went into another girl's room to kill her. He had the weapon, the blood from the other girls on his hand, on the knife. He barged into the room, and all of a sudden a mysterious force repelled him from the room, and the weapon was thrown out of his hand. Why? Well, the girl in that dorm that night had fallen asleep with a rosary in her hand. Before she went off to college, she said to her mother that I promised to pray the rosary every night before I go to bed as for protection. Well, that night, as often happens, if you try and leave it to the end of the day, you're going to fall asleep. She fell asleep. When the cops came, they saw the girl in a basically catatonic state. She was like paralyzed with fear. She said she didn't want to talk to anybody but a priest. They got a priest, a Monsignor came, and she told the priest that what she had told her mother about making that promise. Years later, when Ted Bundy was on death row, he asked to speak to a priest. Guess which priest came? The same one.
In 2010, Glenn Hockton, a young 19-year-old soldier, was on patrol in the Helmand province, Afghanistan. This region, well known for being a Taliban stronghold. Glenn was tasked with patrolling the dry terrain and loading mortars. One day while Glenn was on patrol, he felt his rosary beads fall from his neck. he bent down to pick up his rosary to see if it was broken, and as he bent down, he realized he was standing on a landmine. Glenn had to stand there for 45 terrifying minutes while his colleagues successfully managed to get to him. Without that rosary, and if Glenn had taken one extra step, he would have likely been killed. This was very interesting because 65 years before this, Glenn's great-grandfather also credited the rosary with saving his life. Joseph Sonny Truman, who served with the Royal Regiment of Fusiliers, was a prisoner of war in World War II, as he was captured by the Nazis. Here, he was forced to march away from the advancing Allied armies. As he was walking across a field with half a dozen of his platoon, he spotted some type of object on the ground. Sonny bent down to see what this mysterious object was. As he went to pick up the object, a shell exploded right in front of him, narrowly missing Sonny. Unfortunately, this killed 6 of his comrades who had continued walking while Sonny had stopped to pick up this object. If Sonny had not done this, he likely would have died with them. The object that he picked up was a rosary. So those are 4, actually technically 5 miracles that came from the rosary. I've left some of the sources in the description below if you want to delve deeper into these miracles.